Before I comment on today's readings, especially the gospel reading, I just wanted to make a few announcements. One of them is just a reminder that we have online Stations of the Cross every Friday at 7 p.m. On the Feast of St. Joseph, we will be doing a rosary, and the time might be a little bit different, but please check our website to verify that. Now, as you know, it's very possible that we may be open for Mass starting on Monday. And if we are open for Mass, on Fridays we will only have Mass. In other words, we won't have stations as we did in previous years. The reason just to limit the time that we are in church. So we will continue with the online Stations of the Cross, even if we are able to have public masses. So keep that in mind. Also a reminder, we have a Bible study that just recently started up. They meet on Sundays at 1:30. The link for both of these events should be on our website. And also on this Saturday at 7:30 p.m., I will be giving a short talk on St. Joseph, since it is the year of St. Joseph. So you're welcome to look into all of these things. The links for them are found on our website. So be sure to check out our website. In regards to today's gospel reading, we have our Lord giving a parable of the rich man and Lazarus, the poor man. And there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from this parable. And so it's worthwhile for us to really meditate upon this. And, let's take, for example, Lazarus, the poor man. So he's at the gate of the rich man, and he's just hoping to get some of the scraps that fall from the rich man's table. It mentions that the rich man feasted sumptuously every day. In other words, he had tons of food. He could have easily have shared some food with Lazarus, and Lazarus is there because he knows he's a rich man, so he's more likely to get something from him than from someone who's poor. The reality is that very often poor people are often more generous when it comes to giving than the rich. It's not always the case, but poor people tend to be very generous, and I think part of the reason is because they can relate to others who are poor, and so they're more willing to come to their assistance, to make sacrifices for them. Now, in the case of Lazarus, not only is he poor, not only is he starving, but he's also covered in sores. In other words, he's deprived, of material necessities, even a roof over his head. He's deprived of food. He suffers from hunger, but he has health issues also. He's covered in sores. In other words, he's in a lot of pain. And sometimes when we experience pain, we get angry with God, or we rebel against God, or we question God, why me? The reality is that when we suffer and we accept our situation without rebelling against God, God will compensate us for our sufferings. So poor people receive more graces than rich people do. And part of the reason for that is because they are more open to God. In other words, Lazarus is more likely to pray to God than the rich man, to ask God for assistance. And even if the rich man were to pray, sometimes their prayer is not as heartfelt or as devout as the prayer of a poor man. So being poor, being deprived of health, all of these things can be a blessing if we look at it in the right way and continue to trust in God no matter what, as did Lazarus. So Lazarus goes to the bosom of Abraham, and it doesn't say he went to heaven, because at that time the gates of heaven were closed. So Christ had to first die, and only then could the gates of heaven be opened. So Christ is the one who opens the gates of heaven. So he was in the bosom of Abraham, which we sometimes refer to as a kind of limbo, so a place of waiting, but it was also a place of peace and kind of a natural happiness, not supernatural happiness that we would have with God in heaven. So the poor man Lazarus is rewarded for his way of life, not because he did any great things, not because he had great faith, but simply because he suffered and did not rebel against God. So God rewards him for his faithfulness. In the case of the rich man, The rich man feasted sumptuously. He was covered in fine purple linens. At that time, purple was an extremely costly material because they didn't have many dyes, and so they were able to dye some clothing purple, but it was considered the cloth of royalty. And when they cover our Lord, when he's scourged, and they place the crown of thorns on him, they cover him with a robe, and it kind of implies a purple robe, implying that he's royalty, and they mock him, they spit upon him. So it was considered the color of royalty because only the rich could afford purple. So it emphasizes that he's extremely rich. He feasts sumptuously every day. So in other words, he has more than enough to eat. And not only does he have more than enough to eat, he has savory dishes every day. So his desires are satisfied. Now, why is it that the rich man ends up in Hades, in hell, and is tormented by the flames of hell? Was it because he did something really wicked? Was it because he committed a mortal sin? It doesn't mention anything like that. So it's not what he did, it's what he failed to do. And in fact, it's interesting when we consider that, the rich man has this dialogue with Abraham, send someone here, or send Lazarus to dip his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. And Abraham says, no one can cross between these two places. And then the man says, I beg you to send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they may not also come into this place of torment. The reason I emphasize this is because, to all appearances, the rich man doesn't really seem like a bad man. In other words, he even has compassion and love for his siblings, his brothers. And you and I'm sure we could say, well, we love our family members. We love our relatives. We love our friends. But do we love complete strangers? Do we love our enemies? In other words, do we have true love? So to all appearances, this rich man doesn't seem so bad. Now, if we know that, Lazarus is laying by his gate, and it's obvious that he should have seen him and should have come to his assistance. But he did not. And is the reason that he did not come to his assistance because he thought to himself, yeah, there's that poor man, he's begging from me every single day, but I'm just going to reject him? Spiritual commentators point out that that is not the reason why, that the rich man ends up in hell. So it's not that he consciously said, I am not going to help that person in need. That's not why he ends up in hell. They say that he didn't even notice that Lazarus was there. This is key to understanding this parable. He didn't see him. Why not? Because he was absorbed in his own world, in his own desires, in his own pursuits. Maybe he even held dinners at his place. Maybe he invited lots of people. Maybe he even gave to various charities. But he failed to notice Lazarus at his very gate. And often we're like that. We're walking on the street and we're so consumed by our thoughts, what we need to do, what we're planning for the future, or what project we're working on, and we just kind of dismiss people and don't even acknowledge their existence. And we can easily pass by someone and not notice them, or not notice that they are in need. So yes, it is an omission on the part of Lazarus both to notice him and to help him. But can we really blame someone for not noticing someone? And the answer is In some cases, yes. So in other words, we have a duty to notice our neighbor, to notice that our neighbor is in need, to come to the assistance of our neighbor when we notice that our neighbor is in need. And if we don't do this, we could be committing a sin of omission. And the sin of omission that we may be committing may be serious, dependent on the consequences that would result from our negligence. St. Josemaria Escrivá says that sometimes the way to hell is paved by sins of omission. The sins we fail, or the things that we fail to do, the good things that we fail to do. And it's important that we think about this, because I'm sure we commit sins of omission all the time. Not too long ago on LifeSite News, there was an article about a young man who had tried to commit suicide. I can't remember how old he was. He was probably around 20 years old or 18 years old, something like that. So he wasn't very, very young, but he was still a fairly young man. And this was in California. He jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he survived. There are a few people who have survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. It's a very high bridge. And it takes 4 seconds once you jump off before you hit the ground. So people who have recovered or survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, all of them say that once they jumped, during that 4 seconds, they regret what they have done. They very strongly regret what they've done. But the reason I bring this up is because this young man, he was suicidal, obviously, and he was struggling with his suicidal tendencies, and his father noticed that something was wrong with him and, tried to help him, but he just wasn't able to open up to his father. So he takes a bus to Golden Gate Bridge, and he's just bawling his eyes out. He's crying on the back of the bus. Tears are flowing from his eyes, and there's people on the bus seeing him. And he relates that he wished that someone would have approached him and tried to talk to him, to ask him what was wrong. In other words, he wished that someone would have tried to stop him. But nobody came to his assistance. There were other people on the bus. And he says there was a man, and he said to someone on the bus, "What's the matter with this kid?" In other words, they noticed that he was crying. They noticed he was in distress. They noticed that something was wrong with him. They acknowledged it. But nobody came to his assistance. And so he jumped off Golden Gate Bridge. When he hit the water, because you're traveling so fast from a high elevation, it's kind of like hitting concrete. So when he hit the water, he broke his legs, and he said he felt like the water was sucking him under. So he went down about 40 feet, he said. But he regretted having jumped. And he said that as soon as his hand left the guardrail, he regretted having jumped. And so underwater, he's still alive, and he pleads to God, save me, and he's trying to swim to the top, and I can't use his legs. And fortunately, he does make it to the top, and he is eventually rescued, and he recovers in the hospital. His father visits him and apologizes. He should have done more, and he apologizes to his father for what he did. And he said, he still struggles with suicidal inclinations, but he's learned through therapy and various things how to deal with the crises that he occasionally has. So he got the help that he needed. But it took all this for him to get the help. And how many others are out there who commit suicide because there's no one to befriend them? So in other words, so many sins of omission are being committed. And we might think the loss of a human life is very, very severe. It's very drastic. And yes, it is. And in fact, we could even say that the poor man, Lazarus, the reason he died is because the rich man didn't give him any food. The reason he was so sick is because he wasn't getting proper nourishment. And it's all due to the rich man's negligence. So as awful as physical death, physical suffering is, it's not nearly as awful or horrible as spiritual death and spiritual suffering or psychological suffering. And you and I have the ability to alleviate all of that by looking out to those who are in need. And who are those who are in need? Those who don't believe in God. Those who are living sinful lifestyles. It is up to us to reach out to them, to present them with the good news, to encourage them to give up their sinful lifestyles, to convince them that that is not going to make them happy. They may not listen, that is true. But at least we will have done our part so that we will not be guilty of sins of omission.